It was supposed to be a milestone, my son Ryan's 18th birthday, a day that marked the end of his childhood and the beginning of his adult life. The house was filled with the usual celebration noise, balloons, laughter, the smell of freshly baked cake. Ryan had invited a few of his friends over, and my wife, Sarah, had been in a surprisingly good mood for weeks leading up to it. The evening felt like something we could all look back on fondly, a memory to cherish. We had planned a family dinner in our cozy living room, just like we'd always done for birthdays. Nothing extravagant, nothing over the top, just a small celebration with the people who mattered most. I remember Ryan standing by the fireplace, a huge grin on his face as he opened his gifts. There was something so innocent about it, watching him transition from a teenager into a young adult. But then, in the middle of dinner, just as I was about to raise a toast to Ryan's future, Sarah stood up. I thought she was going to offer some words of encouragement to our son, perhaps even share a heartfelt moment about how proud she was. She had always been emotional, sentimental about these family events, so I was expecting something like that. Instead, she cleared her throat, and the whole room grew instantly still. Everyone stopped what they were doing. The sound of laughter, the chatter, everything just dropped away. I looked at her, expecting the usual warmth, but her face was tense. Her eyes were locked onto me, but there was something different in her gaze, something cold, something calculated. "I'm leaving," Sarah said flatly. "I'm done." I blinked, trying to process her words, but they hung in the air like a punch to the stomach. I had no idea what she was talking about. She looked at me again, then briefly glanced at Ryan, who had stopped mid-chew, his eyes wide with confusion. "I'm leaving you, Jake. I've been thinking about this for a long time." Her voice wavered slightly, but she stood firm. "I've been unhappy for a long time, and I can't do this anymore. I'm done pretending." Ryan looked at me, then back at Sarah, his face a mirror of disbelief. "Mom, what do you mean? Is this a joke?" He laughed nervously, but it wasn't the kind of laughter that could relieve the tension in the room. It was hollow. He wasn't laughing because it was funny. He was laughing because he thought she had to be joking. But she wasn't. She just shook her head, her lips set in a hard line. "No joke, Ryan," she said softly, her eyes never leaving me. "I'm not happy, and I haven't been for a long time. I can't do this anymore." The words hit like a freight train. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room, and I was stuck in a vacuum. How had we gotten here? How had everything come to this point? I looked at Ryan, who was now staring at his mother with wide eyes. His birthday, his moment, had turned into something ugly. I don't know what made me do it, but I forced myself to breathe slowly. I looked back at Sarah, trying to process what she had just said. I couldn't let this ruin the night. Not for Ryan, not for us. "Sarah," I said, my voice as calm as I could manage, "not here. Not now. This is Ryan's day. He doesn't need to hear this. We'll talk about this later. Please." But she wasn't hearing me. She was already done. Her eyes were resolute, cold even. I could see a layer of anger underneath her controlled exterior. The years of frustration, of whatever had been brewing inside her, had finally exploded. Ryan stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "What's going on? Why are you doing this now, Mom?" He didn't raise his voice, but there was a level of hurt in his words that struck me. He wasn't angry, he was confused, and he was in pain. "What about Dad? What about me?" Sarah didn't answer. She just turned her back on him, her eyes fixed firmly on me, as if I was the cause of all of it. And I didn't understand why. Was this really about me? Was it really about the years we had spent together, the family we had built? Or was there something else at play? Something she hadn't shared with me? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. For Ryan, for the sake of what little dignity we had left, I had to stay calm. The last thing Ryan needed was to see his parents tearing each other apart on his birthday. "Let's just all sit down," I said softly, motioning for everyone to calm down. But my voice didn't have the same power it used to. It didn't have the same authority. My world was crumbling, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Sarah's declaration had shattered the very foundation I thought we had built. Ryan sat back down, but I could see the confusion and hurt in his eyes. His mother had just shattered whatever image of stability he had left. His whole world was turning upside down. And I couldn't blame him. I felt it too. The dinner continued, but it was a hollow affair. There were no more jokes, no more laughs. just the clinking of silverware, the occasional murmur, and the weight of Sarah's words hanging in the air like an unbearable fog. The rest of the evening was a blur. Ryan left early, retreating to his room, and I could hear him through the walls, crying quietly. Sarah stayed for a while, but she wasn't really there. She was physically present, but mentally, she had already checked out. She had made her decision, and there was no turning back. Later that night, as I sat in the living room trying to process everything, I realized that what Sarah had done wasn't just an announcement. It was a declaration of war. A war I hadn't seen coming. A war I wasn't prepared for. And in that moment, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. My family, my marriage, my life. It was all slipping through my fingers, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The night Sarah announced she was leaving me, my entire world felt like it had been flipped upside down. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think straight. I sat there in the living room, the weight of her words pressing on me, knowing I had to somehow make sense of everything. But as much as I wanted to focus on the immediate aftermath, I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. Something didn't add up. There was something behind Sarah's sudden decision to leave, a piece of the puzzle I couldn't quite see. The way she had stood there in front of our son, so cold and detached, made me feel like I had been living a lie for years. Had I missed something? Had I been too blind to see what was going on beneath the surface? The next morning, after I'd barely slept, I did what I've always done when I'm trying to solve a problem. I got to work. I'm a tech consultant, which means I know how to dig deep, find things people would rather keep hidden. And Sarah, she had always been a little too secretive with her phone, her emails, her finances. I started with her financial records. It wasn't the first time I had looked through our shared accounts, but this time felt different. I knew I had to be careful. If she was truly planning to leave, there were things I needed to prepare for, things I needed to protect. Our joint savings, our investments, and, what caught my attention the most, our credit card statements. As I pored over the documents, my heart sank. There were numerous large, unexplained transfers, money moving out of our accounts and into another one. The transactions were frequent, but the names of the accounts were vague, nothing that would raise red flags unless you really looked. I pulled up the details, my fingers trembling slightly as I opened a few of the transactions. There was a significant sum that had been sent to a woman named Claire Turner. The name didn't mean anything to me. I dug deeper. More transfers, more payments, more money funneled to this Claire Turner. And then there were the receipts for hotel stays, meals at expensive restaurants, plane tickets. The picture was starting to come together, but it was a jarring one. I knew Sarah wasn't the type to cheat. At least, I didn't think she was. But these financial transactions, these hidden purchases, told a different story. She had been seeing someone I didn't know, someone I had never heard of. At that point, I couldn't ignore it any longer. There was a part of me that wanted to shut it all down, to pretend I hadn't seen what I had just uncovered. But I couldn't. I had to know the truth. I had to understand why Sarah was so determined to leave, why everything seemed to be happening so suddenly. That's when I made the decision to look at the digital files. I had access to her email accounts, her bank apps. She'd always been open about letting me check things if I needed to. It wasn't that she had ever been secretive. It was just that she was always a little disorganized. But now, in light of everything that had happened, I realized she had been hiding things in plain sight. I opened her inbox. Most of it was mundane, work emails, confirmations for grocery deliveries, old newsletters. But then, about halfway down the list, I saw something that made my stomach turn. An email from Claire Turner, a personal one. And the subject line was, well, it was too much to ignore. Looking forward to seeing you again next weekend. I clicked on the email, my hands starting to shake. It was a message from Claire, confirming the weekend getaway they'd planned. There were references to inside jokes, a few cryptic comments about their relationship, and a plan to spend the weekend in a cabin by the lake. There was no mistaking it now. Sarah was involved with this woman. She had been carrying on an affair with her, and everything, our entire life together, had been a lie. I pulled up Sarah's calendar next. It was littered with appointments, but some of the dates were unusual. There were hotel bookings on weekends when I thought she had been away for work trips. That's when the rage started building inside me. I had been kept in the dark, and for what? Was she really that unhappy? Had I missed all the signs? Or was I just too caught up in my own world, trusting her and assuming everything was fine? I couldn't just sit there and stew in anger. I needed more. The flash drive. It was sitting on my desk, waiting for the right moment. I had made sure to save all of the incriminating files, bank statements, emails, receipts, everything. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about taking control of the situation. I wasn't going to let Sarah walk out the door without facing the consequences of her actions. As I copied the files to the drive, I felt a strange calm wash over me. This wasn't the way I had planned things, but it was necessary. I had to protect myself. I had to protect Ryan, and I had to know that I wasn't the only one left holding the broken pieces of a marriage I had believed was intact. I slipped the flash drive into my pocket, knowing the time was coming. The time to confront Sarah, to show her everything I had uncovered, was drawing near. I couldn't keep living in this illusion. I had to face the truth, even if it meant the end of everything I thought I knew. But at least now, I had something she couldn't deny, something real, something that would force her to face the choices she had made. I wasn't going to let her leave without explaining herself. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. The following evening, I knew it was time. I had spent the entire day preparing, gathering my thoughts, and organizing everything I needed. But no amount of preparation could have prepared me for the moment that was about to unfold. I waited until the house was quiet. Ryan was out with his friends, and Sarah had returned from her afternoon meeting. I told her I needed to talk, and she didn't hesitate to follow me into the living room. The tension was palpable. She had been distant the past few days, her demeanor cold, like she was already halfway out the door. But this was different. I wasn't about to let her walk away without facing what she had done. As soon as Sarah entered the living room, I could see it in her eyes, the same look I'd seen before when she thought she had gotten away with something. But this time, I wasn't going to let her have the upper hand. I sat down on the couch, holding the flash drive in my hand, the one that contained everything I had uncovered about her secret life, the financial transfers, the emails, the hotel receipts, and the damning proof of her affair. I had already read through it all a dozen times, but now it was time to make her see what I knew. "I've been looking through our finances, Sarah," I said, my voice steady, calm. "And I've found a few things that don't add up. A few things you probably didn't think I'd ever notice." Her eyes flickered briefly, but she quickly composed herself, crossing her arms defensively. "Jake, not this again. You know I've been busy with work. I'm just trying to figure things out, and you—" I cut her off. "Stop. Just stop. I'm not here to talk about your excuses anymore. I've already found everything, Sarah. Everything." I held up the flash drive, watching her face as she registered what I was holding. Her expression shifted. Her eyes narrowed, and she took a small step back, like she was trying to distance herself from the truth. "I'm sure you thought you could hide everything, but you were wrong. This," I pointed to the flash drive, "is all the evidence I need. It's your affair with Claire Turner, the money transfers to secret accounts, the hotel stays, the lies you've been telling me for months. It's all here." Her face paled, and for a moment, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. She wasn't expecting this. She wasn't expecting me to have anything concrete. For all her secrecy, she had underestimated me. You don't have to do this, Jake," she said weakly, her voice trembling. "Please, don't make this harder than it already is." I shook my head. "No, Sarah, you made it hard. You made this harder than it needed to be when you decided to lie to me, to Ryan, to everyone. All the things I thought we built, our family, our future, it's all a lie, and I'm done letting you get away with it." I tossed the flash drive onto the coffee table, just inches from her, daring her to look. I wanted her to see it all, the carefully crafted facade she had been hiding behind. But Sarah didn't reach for the drive. She just stood there, frozen, staring at it like it might bite her. "Go ahead," I said. "Open it. I want you to see everything. I want you to see how far you've gone behind my back. I want you to see that I know it all. The money, the affair, the lies, all of it." For a moment, she hesitated, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. Then, as if she finally realized she had no way out, she reached for the flash drive, her hands shaking as she plugged it into the laptop on the coffee table. The screen lit up with a list of files, and I watched her face as she scrolled through the evidence one by one. I didn't say anything as she clicked through the documents. The silence in the room was thick with tension. The only sound was the soft clicking of the mouse as she opened the emails, the bank statements, and the receipts I had so carefully compiled. At first she was still in denial, muttering under her breath, This isn't what it looks like. You don't understand. This is all just business stuff, miscommunication. But with each new file she opened, her excuses crumbled. Her face grew paler, her mouth going dry. I could see the weight of the truth settling in. She couldn't deny it anymore. Not when it was all laid out in front of her. Not when I was sitting there, watching her face slowly break apart as she absorbed the reality of what she had done. "I never thought you'd do this to me, Sarah," I said, my voice quieter now. I wasn't angry anymore. The anger had drained out of me, replaced by a cold, calm resolve. "You could have just told me the truth. You could have been honest, but you chose this lie, this betrayal, and now it's over." She looked at me, tears welling up in her eyes. "Jake, please. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I never wanted to hurt you. I was confused, and Claire, she made me feel like I was seen again. I didn't know how to—" I stood up abruptly, cutting her off. "Enough. You don't get to make excuses for this anymore. You've done enough damage. I'm done being your fool, Sarah." For a moment, we just stood there, the weight of everything crashing down between us. Sarah's face twisted with regret, but it was too late. The trust was gone, shattered beyond repair. The marriage I thought I had was now just a hollow shell, filled with lies and broken promises. "I want you to leave," I said, my voice firm. "I can't do this anymore. I don't want to be with someone who can look me in the eye and lie to me like you have. I deserve better than this." She didn't argue. She didn't fight me. Instead, she collapsed onto the couch, her shoulders shaking as the weight of what she had done finally sank in. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her there, staring at the flash drive. I had given her the truth. Now, she had to live with it. The aftermath of my confrontation with Sarah came fast. The day after I confronted her with the flash drive, I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on everyone in the house. It wasn't just about Sarah and me anymore. Our son, Ryan, was now a part of it, and I couldn't stand the thought of him being caught in the middle of this mess. We had a family dinner planned. It wasn't anything special, just a simple meal, a quiet evening, something that had once been routine. But nothing felt routine anymore. I could see the unease in the air as we gathered around the table. Even my parents, who had been supportive of Sarah and me throughout our marriage, seemed to sense that the air was thick with something else, something they couldn't ignore. Sarah didn't seem to have the strength to hold it together. She was visibly shaken, her eyes red from the tears that had come earlier, but she had tried to pull herself together, at least outwardly. I knew, though, that she was about to break. It was only a matter of time. Ryan sat at the edge of the table, his usual cheerful self replaced by the same confusion I had seen the night before at his birthday. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of the chaos. I could see the hurt in his eyes. It was as if the ground had been pulled out from under him, and he didn't know how to stand. His mother, the one person he had always trusted without question, had just torn their world apart. I didn't want to put him in the middle, but it was becoming impossible to ignore that he was already there. He kept looking at Sarah and then at me, his face full of questions that neither of us could answer. He didn't deserve this. None of us did. "I didn't want any of this to happen," Sarah whispered, looking around the table. Her voice was thin, almost breaking. She looked at Ryan, her face pleading, as though she was still looking for some kind of understanding or perhaps forgiveness. "I never meant to hurt any of you. I thought it would just be a small mistake, a mistake I could hide." But there was no hiding anymore, not after everything had come to light. Ryan stared at her, his face pale, but it was his silence that was the loudest. He didn't know how to respond. How could he? How do you process something like this, when the person you've trusted most betrays you in such a deep, incomprehensible way? My parents sat across from us, their faces filled with disappointment. My father, who had always been a man of few words, was uncharacteristically quiet. He kept his eyes down, his jaw tight, as if he were holding something back. I could tell he was furious, but he wasn't about to lash out. Not yet. But the tension was growing. Even my mother, usually the voice of reason, sat with her hands clenched in her lap, her lips pressed together in a line of worry. It wasn't just the marriage that was falling apart. It was the family. Sarah began to cry then, her shoulders trembling as she collapsed into herself. It wasn't the dramatic breakdown I had expected. It was quieter, almost more tragic. She wasn't angry or defensive anymore. She had nothing left to say, no more excuses to offer. There were no more words for the damage she had done, for the hurt she had caused everyone at this table. Her tears were soft, but they hit harder than any argument. "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered, her voice breaking under the weight of her own guilt. "I never wanted to hurt you, Jake, or Ryan, but I made a mistake, a terrible mistake." It was then that I realized the truth of her actions had finally hit her. She wasn't fighting back anymore. She wasn't trying to justify her decisions. The facade of strength she'd built up had crumbled, and all that was left was the raw, overwhelming realization of the damage she'd done. But even in that moment of vulnerability, there was something bitter in me, something that didn't want to forgive her, even if she was sorry. Ryan, who had been staring at his mother, finally spoke, his voice low and filled with quiet anger. "How could you do this to us?" he asked, his hands gripping the edge of his plate. "How could you do this to Dad?" Those words hit harder than anything I could have said. It wasn't just the betrayal of a marriage, it was the betrayal of a son. And that was something I couldn't ignore. I hadn't realized how much Ryan had been holding it together, how much he had been hoping that this was all just some mistake, some misunderstanding. But now, in front of everyone, he was seeing the truth, and he wasn't hiding from it. Sarah looked at him, her eyes full of regret, but she didn't answer him. What could she say? There was no excuse. She couldn't undo the past few days. She couldn't erase the damage that had been done. The meal dragged on in silence after that. No one knew what to say. The family dynamics had shifted in ways I hadn't expected, and it felt like the very foundation we had built this life on was crumbling beneath us. What had been a happy, full table was now just a room full of hurt and disappointment. No one knew how to pick up the pieces, or even if they could. As the evening went on, Sarah tried to salvage some sense of normalcy, but it was clear that the cracks in our family could no longer be ignored. She left early, excusing herself with a weak, "I need some air," but the damage had already been done. She wasn't going to be the same person when she returned. I sat there, numb, my mind racing. I wanted to be angry at Sarah, but I was just tired. Tired of the lies, tired of the secrets. Most of all, I was tired of seeing my son in pain. How could I protect him from this? How could I fix this broken family? The night ended quietly with Sarah retreating to our bedroom and Ryan going to his room without saying another word. I knew that nothing would be the same. I couldn't pretend anymore. This wasn't just a rough patch. It was the end of something, and there was no going back. I couldn't fix what had been broken. And even though I knew there was a long road ahead of us, a part of me finally realized that maybe this was the beginning of something new. Something I wasn't sure I was ready for, but something I would have to face, whether I liked it or not. The days following Sarah's announcement felt like I was living in a blur. Everything that had been stable, everything I thought I understood about our lives, had shifted in an instant. But even in the chaos, there was one constant: my family. They became my anchor when I felt like I was about to lose everything. My dad, as always, was the one to give me the most practical advice. He didn't waste time with emotions. "Jake, you can't just let this happen to you. You've got to think about Ryan. This isn't just about you and Sarah anymore. This is about your son's future," he said. His words hit hard. I had been so consumed by the hurt and anger that I hadn't considered how all of this was affecting Ryan. He was already having a tough time processing his mother's sudden announcement, and I realized that I needed to step up for him in a way I never had before. Mom was a little more emotional, but still steadfast in her support. She had been close to Sarah for years, and I could tell this was just as painful for her. She loved Sarah like a daughter, but that didn't stop her from being there for me. "You don't have to go through this alone," she said, her voice soft but firm. "We'll help you with whatever you need." I wasn't used to relying on others for emotional support, but her words were a reminder that I wasn't fighting this battle by myself. She even offered to take Ryan out of the house for a few days, hoping to give him some space to process everything. It was an offer I gratefully accepted. Mike, my younger brother, was a bit more direct. He was angry, not just with Sarah, but with how everything had gone down. "Are you seriously going to let her get away with this?" he demanded. At first, I wasn't sure how to respond. The situation felt so complicated and overwhelming, but Mike's anger lit a fire under me. "You've got to stand up for yourself. Don't let her walk all over you," he added, his voice filled with determination. I had always appreciated Mike's straightforwardness, even if it sometimes made me uncomfortable. This time, it was exactly what I needed to hear. "You need to get a lawyer. You need to protect yourself, your future, and Ryan's future," he said. And I realized he was right. This wasn't just about the end of a marriage, it was about protecting everything I had worked for. I immediately started looking into lawyers. After a few consultations, I decided to hire Elaine, a family law attorney who came highly recommended by a colleague. From the moment I met her, I felt a sense of relief. She didn't waste time with pleasantries, but got straight to the point. "You've got the evidence, Jake. Let's use it to your advantage," she said, making it clear that we had a strong case. Her no-nonsense attitude reassured me. The evidence I had, Sarah's hidden financial transactions and her affair with Alex, gave me a solid foundation. We immediately began freezing our joint accounts to prevent any further withdrawals. I also started drafting the initial divorce papers, knowing that this would be a long, hard battle. The days that followed were a whirlwind of paperwork, meetings, and phone calls. Every time I met with Elaine, I felt more and more confident that I could handle this. We carefully outlined the steps for the divorce process, and I began to realize just how much was at stake. I couldn't let Sarah get away with treating me this way, not when I had worked so hard to build our life together. The financial stakes were high, especially when I thought about Ryan's future and the house we had bought together. In the meantime, Sarah tried to make amends. She called me multiple times, trying to explain herself, but I was resolute. I knew there was no going back. The trust was gone, and even though we had spent years together, the foundation had crumbled. The hardest part was still to come, telling Ryan about everything that was happening. He already felt betrayed by Sarah, but I had to break the news that we were officially separating, and he would have to get used to a new reality. As the legal battle began to unfold, the tension in the house became palpable. But through it all, my family stood by me. They supported me through the sleepless nights, the stress of legal meetings, and the emotional toll it took. I began to realize just how lucky I was to have them in my corner. They reminded me that while Sarah might have been ready to walk away from our family, I still had a support system that would never abandon me. The fight ahead would be long and difficult, but I was no longer alone. With the backing of my family, the legal expertise of Elaine, and my own determination, I was ready to face whatever came next. The road to healing and rebuilding wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. Months after the divorce, I dove into my dream of opening a tech consulting firm. It was tough at first, but slowly the business began to take off. Ryan, who had been struggling, saw me working hard, and it gave him hope for his future too. With the business growing, I hired a few associates and began to feel in control of my life again. For the first time in years, I was truly fulfilled, both personally and professionally. One Saturday, Ryan looked at me and said, "I'm proud of you, Dad." It was a simple moment, but it meant the world. It reminded me that through all the struggles, I had managed to rebuild not just my career, but my life.